At first glance, it was just an old, rusting World War I truck, abandoned, forgotten, and sinking into history. But the moment Sarah slid her hands over its scarred steel, she knew something was different. Hidden beneath the grime was a secret someone had tried to bury for over a century. And when she found it, it changed everything. This isn't just a restoration, it's a rescue mission. Because what was uncovered inside this truck could rewrite a piece of history, and not everyone wants that truth to come out. Stay with me, the story you're about to hear has been waiting 106 years for someone to tell it. Before we dive in, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? If you enjoy stories like this, make sure to hit that subscribe button because tomorrow's episode is truly mind-blowing. Let's get started. On the outskirts of a quiet New England town, where the early morning mist clung low to the fields and the air carried a faint tang of sea salt, stood a weathered brick workshop with fading green bay doors. This was Sarah Whitmore's domain, a 38-year-old master mechanic whose steady hands and sharp eyes had revived more machines than she could count. She'd learned her craft from her grandfather, a WWI veteran who believed every engine had a soul and every dent told a story. One crisp autumn morning, the steady growl of a diesel engine broke the stillness. Sarah stepped outside, coffee in hand, just as a familiar figure pulled into the yard, Tom Bennett, a local hauler who'd delivered more than a few restoration projects to her over the years. But this time, strapped to the back of his flatbed, was something that made her pause mid-sip. It was a World War I military truck, chained down like a slumbering giant. Its olive paint had worn to a patchwork of muted green and bare steel. Bullet nicks dotted the driver's door, and the wooden cargo bed was weathered to a silvery gray. As Tom cut the engine, he leaned out the window and called. "Picked her up from an old barn outside Portsmouth. Thought you might want to meet her." Sarah's breath caught. She already knew this wasn't just a relic. It was a survivor. And now, it was hers to wake. The truck sat in the center of Sarah Whitmore's workshop like a slumbering beast, its massive frame dwarfing everything else in the room. Even with the bay doors open and autumn sunlight streaming in, the shadows it cast felt heavy, as though time itself had followed it inside. Sarah circled it slowly, her boots crunching over loose gravel and rust flakes. Every inch of the truck told a story, only she didn't know the language yet. The hood was fastened with weathered leather straps so dry they cracked at her touch. The windshield glass, clouded with dust and fine scratches, bore a spiderweb crack at the corner, a reminder of some long-ago impact. She ran her fingers along the steel grille, feeling the cold bite of metal that had seen battlefields and back roads a century ago. The first step in any restoration was assessment, and Sarah approached it like an archaeologist. She started with the cab, pulling open the driver's door. The hinges groaned, reluctant after decades of neglect. Inside, the seats were little more than sagging burlap over brittle springs. A rusted canteen rolled from under the bench, thudding softly onto the floor. "Not standard issue?" she murmured, recognizing its unusual shape. Someone had added personal touches here, small, human fingerprints in the life of the machine. She leaned in further, inspecting the dashboard. The gauges were simple brass-rimmed dials, their needles frozen mid-swing. But what caught her attention was a faint engraving, barely visible beneath layers of grime. She rubbed it gently with a cloth, revealing a small heart scratched into the metal, right where a driver's right hand might rest between shifts. Sarah straightened, frowning. A soldier's mark, perhaps, or a token of luck. She'd seen mechanics leave their initials on restored vehicles, but this was different, more intimate. Moving on, she slid beneath the truck on her mechanic's creeper, flashlight in hand. The undercarriage was a time capsule of dust, grease, and rust. But it was something else that made her pause. Bolted to the frame, half hidden behind a crossbeam, was a small, dented steel box no bigger than a cigar case. It wasn't part of any standard design she knew from WWI schematics. Her heart thudded. She reached up and unfastened the two corroded bolts holding it in place. It came free with a reluctant squeal of metal. Sarah sat up, the box resting in her lap. It was sealed shut with a simple latch, though the metal had fused in places from years of oxidation. Fetching a can of penetrating oil, she worked the latch until it yielded with a sharp snap. Inside, cushioned by yellowed scraps of cloth, lay 3 items. A small brass key, its bow stamped with the letters B4. A dog-eared photograph of a group of soldiers leaning against a truck that looked exactly like the one in her shop, same grill. Same stance, but with fresh paint and a proud unit emblem on its side. A folded slip of paper, the edges frayed and brittle. Hand steady, but slow. Sarah unfolded the paper. The handwriting was faded but legible. If this reaches you, it means she made it home. Don't trust the report. B4 under the heart. J.M. Sarah stared at the note, her mind racing. Under the heart. She thought back to the heart-shaped scratch on the dashboard. Could it be a marker? She climbed into the cab again, running her hands over the spot until her fingertips brushed something small and metallic. A barely visible keyhole, no larger than the brass key she now held. The key slid in perfectly. With a gentle twist, a hidden compartment popped open just below the dash. Inside was another box, this one wooden, wrapped in waxed canvas. Sarah hesitated for a breath, then unwrapped it. The contents took her breath away. A set of meticulously folded field maps marked with penciled roots and red X's. A small leather-bound notebook, its pages covered in tight, hurried handwriting. A single silver star medal, dulled with age. She flipped open the notebook. The entries were dated from 1917, written during active duty in France. Many were mundane weather notes. Supply lists, but scattered among them were detailed accounts of a mission not mentioned in any official history. She knew a daring nighttime evacuation of wounded soldiers under heavy fire, with this very truck as the lead vehicle. One entry was underlined twice. Truck took the hit, but kept moving. She saved every man aboard. Sarah sat back, the notebook trembling in her hands. This wasn't just a restoration project anymore. This was a piece of living history, one that someone had gone to great lengths to hide and preserve. She looked at the truck differently now. It wasn't just metal and wood. It was a witness. And she was holding the key literally and figuratively to a story that deserved to be told. Her breath came slower, deeper. She knew what came next. The restoration wouldn't just bring the truck back to life, it would bring its truth back into the light. And Sarah Whitmore had no intention of letting it stay buried. For 3 days after discovering the hidden compartment, Sarah Whitmore barely left the workshop. The wooden box's contents, the maps, the notebook, the metal sat neatly on her workbench, each item carefully catalogued and photographed. She'd worked late into the night, poring over the handwritten entries, cross-referencing locations with online archives, and matching the faded unit markings on the truck to regimental records from 1917. The more she learned, the more extraordinary it became. According to the notebook, this truck identified in the entries as Norbert X had led a desperate evacuation during the Second Battle of Passchendaele. The mission had been deemed impossible by command, yet the convoy returned with every wounded man alive. The official war report never mentioned it. Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that someone, somewhere, had tried very hard to erase this story. That morning, while she was tracing wiring beneath the dashboard. A flicker of movement outside caught her eye. Through the dusty shop windows, she saw a black sedan parked across the street. Its engine was off, but she could make out the silhouette of a man in the driver's seat. He wasn't looking at his phone, or a map. He was watching her. Her stomach tightened. She stepped outside, wiping her hands on a rag, and started toward the sedan. Before she could get halfway across the street, the car's engine roared to life, and it pulled away smoothly, turning out of sight. No plates on the front bumper. That afternoon, Tom Bennett dropped by with a box of spare carburetor parts. When Sarah told him about the car, his brow furrowed. "You think someone's checking up on you?" "Feels like it," she said, "and not in a friendly way." Tom glanced toward the truck. "That thing's got history. Sarah, you dig deep enough, you might find folks who'd rather keep it buried." The words lingered in her mind hours later when the shop's phone rang. The voice on the other end was male, low and deliberate. "Miss Whitmore, I understand you've acquired a 1917 Holt cargo truck." Her grip on the receiver tightened. Who is this someone who strongly suggests you stop prying into its past? Or what a pause. Then some stories don't end well for the people who tell them. The line went dead. Sarah set the phone down slowly, pulse pounding. She wasn't sure if it was fear or anger that burned hotter in her chest. That night, she locked up the workshop earlier than usual, taking the notebook and medal home with her. She sat at her kitchen table, staring at the looping handwriting of a soldier who'd been dead for a century. Whoever Jyoti was, he had wanted the truth preserved, not hidden, and she wasn't about to let a nameless voice scare her off. The next day, she called in a favor from an old friend, Clara Benton, a local historian and part-time journalist known for chasing down impossible stories. Clara arrived that afternoon, camera slung over her shoulder, curiosity blazing in her eyes. When Sarah laid out the items from the truck, Clara let out a slow whistle. These maps alone could be worth a fortune to collectors. But paired with this notebook, this isn't just memorabilia. Sarah, this is evidence. Military historians would kill to get their hands on it. Apparently, someone might kill to keep it quiet. Sarah muttered, telling her about the sedan and the phone call. Clara's expression sharpened. "Then we document everything. Photos, scans, backups in multiple places. If this story disappears, it won't be because we didn't try." They spent hours photographing each page of the notebook, scanning the maps, and uploading copies to secure drives. As the sun dipped low, Sarah felt a measure of relief knowing the story was no longer locked in just one box or in her shop. But relief didn't last. Around 9 p.m., as she walked out to lock the shop for the night, she froze. The truck's driver's side door, always shut tight, was standing open. She moved slowly, every sense on alert, and peered inside. Nothing seemed disturbed, until she noticed the empty space on the workbench where the wooden box had been. Her heart lurched. The box, the maps, the metal, they were gone. Sarah's eyes swept the darkened yard, but the only sound was the wind rattling the workshop's tin awning. Whoever had taken it was gone. She pulled out her phone, fingers trembling, and called Clara. "They've got it," she said. "Do you have the digital copies?" "Yes." But Sarah's voice broke. "That box belonged in the truck. It's part of its history." Clara's voice was firm. "Then we get it back. Whoever took it isn't expecting you to fight." Sarah hung up, her jaw set. She looked at the empty space where the truck's seat still bore the faint imprint of the heart-shaped engraving. This wasn't over. Whoever thought they could erase the truck's story had just made the mistake of involving her. And Sarah Whitmore didn't back down. The next morning, the October sky hung low and heavy over New England, the kind of gray that seemed to flatten all colors. Sarah Whitmore stood in the middle of her workshop, arms folded, staring at the truck like it was an old friend who'd been wronged. The empty space on the workbench gnawed at her. She had the scans, the photographs, the backups, but the physical box, the tangible proof of the truck's service and sacrifice, was gone. Whoever had taken it hadn't just stolen objects, they'd stolen a piece of the truck's soul. Sarah wasn't the type to let go of things easily. Her grandfather had called it stubbornness. She preferred to think of it as loyalty. That morning, loyalty was burning in her chest. She picked up the phone and called Clara Benton. "We're not just telling this story anymore," Sarah said. "We're finding that box, and we're finding out who wants it buried." Clara's voice was sharp with determination. "I've been digging into the unit markings on the truck. There's a surviving roster from 1917, your JM. Might be James McAllister, a corporal who went missing in action during the same battle mentioned in the notebook. If that's him, he had family in Boston." Sarah grabbed her jacket. Then Boston's our first stop. The city was a world away from her quiet workshop. The streets pulsed with noise and movement, but Sarah's focus stayed sharp. Clara had tracked down McAllister's great-grandson, Thomas, a retired firefighter in his 60s. He met them in a modest row house lined with family photographs. When Sarah explained why she was there, Thomas's eyes softened. "My great-grandfather. They always said he disappeared without a trace. My grandmother never believed it. She said he'd sent her a letter right before he vanished, promising he'd be home by Christmas. He disappeared into another room and returned with an old, creased envelope. The handwriting matched the notebook's entries. Inside was a short letter. The same looping hand. If I don't make it, there's a truck that will... She's the proof. She'll find her way home." Sarah felt the weight of the words settle over her. She told Thomas about the theft, the threats, and the missing box. He listened quietly, then said, "If someone's still afraid of what's in that truck after 100 years, it must matter." On the drive back, Clara was uncharacteristically quiet. "Finally," she said. "Sarah, you realize this is bigger than just a stolen box, right? Whoever took it probably knew exactly where to look. That means they've been here before, watching." Sarah gripped the wheel. "Then they'll be back, and next time, I'll be ready." That night, she stayed in the workshop long after dark, the truck looming in the shadows. She studied it again. Not just as a machine, but as a witness. Every dent, every scar, every makeshift repair whispered of the men who'd relied on it. She thought of her grandfather's stories, how in war, machines became comrades, lifelines, sometimes the only constant. She imagined Corporal McAllister behind the wheel, navigating mud and chaos with the same dashboard heartmark that now guided her. The theft had changed something in her. Before, this had been about honoring the past. Now, it was also about defending it. She wasn't just restoring a truck, she was guarding a testimony. 2 days later, Clara called with news. A contact in Portsmouth says a man's been asking around for WWI military vehicles, specifically cargo trucks. Cash offers? No questions. Sound familiar? Sarah's pulse quickened. Portsmouth. That was where Tom had picked up the truck. The trail was narrowing. She tightened the tarp over the truck, locked the shop, and drove to Portsmouth with Clara. The harbor town was brisk with sea wind, its streets dotted with antique shops and warehouses. They found the address Clara's contact had given, a low, nondescript building with faded lettering on the door, Atlantic Storage and Transport. Inside, the air smelled faintly of oil and dust. Rows of crates and covered shapes filled the space, and in the corner, Sarah saw it, the wooden box from her truck, resting on a metal shelf. Before she could move, a man stepped out from behind a stack of crates, mid-50s, sharp suit, and eyes that missed nothing. "You should have stayed in your workshop, Miss Whitmore," he said. Sarah squared her shoulders. "That box belongs to the truck, and the truck belongs to history." He gave a thin smile. "History is written by the people who keep it, and sometimes it's kept out of sight for a reason." Her jaw clenched. Not this time. The standoff stretched long enough for Sarah to hear Clara behind her, quietly dialing her phone. The man's eyes flicked to the movement, and Sarah took her chance, closing the distance, snatching the box, and bolting for the door. They didn't stop running until they reached the street, the harbor wind cutting across their faces. Sarah clutched the box to her chest, heart hammering. Back in the truck, she looked at Clara. "We finish this. We tell the story. All of it." And for the first time since the theft, she felt the balance shift, not in her favor yet, but enough to know the fight was far from over. The morning after retrieving the wooden box, the air in Sarah Whitmore's workshop felt different, charged, like the hum of an engine right before ignition. She had set the box back on the workbench, this time in full view, almost defiantly. The truck seemed to loom over it, silent but approving, as if the two were finally reunited. She and Clara spent the better part of the day unpacking the contents again, but this time with a new plan. It wasn't enough to simply keep these artifacts safe. They needed to make their story impossible to erase. "We take it public," Clara said, flipping through the leather-bound notebook. "Not just a newspaper article, an exhibit, maybe even a traveling one. Get the truck running again and let people see her for themselves." Sarah hesitated. "It's been sitting for a century. The restoration alone could take months." Clara grinned. "Then we better get started." The work was grueling, but Sarah thrived on it. Every bolt she loosened, every corroded part she replaced, felt like breathing life back into a friend. She sourced original components from collectors, fabricated missing pieces in her shop, and carefully preserved battle scars instead of erasing them. The heart-shaped engraving on the dash stayed exactly as she'd found it. Word spread quickly. Veterans stopped by to watch her work, some sharing stories of their own wartime vehicles. Local mechanics volunteered their time. Tom Bennett returned with a flatbed full of salvaged parts from an old farm truck that matched the WWI model's axle assembly. It became a community project, each helping hand invested in seeing the truck roll again. In the evenings, Sarah and Clara worked on the historical side, digitizing maps, annotating the notebook's entries with confirmed battle records, and cross-referencing soldier names with archival databases. The name James McAllister began to surface in more than just the roster Clara had found. Reports from the Times suggested he had been posthumously recommended for the Silver Star, but the commendation was never awarded. "This is it," Clara said one night, tapping the metal in the box. "We show the world not only what this truck did, but what was taken from the men who drove her." By early spring, the truck christened Note 6 once more sat gleaming in the workshop's center. She wasn't showroom perfect, and Sarah wouldn't have wanted her that way. The body still bore the dents of shell fire. The steering wheel still carried the marks of a century of use, but her engine, painstakingly rebuilt, rumbled with steady power. They decided the first public showing would be at the State Veterans Hall, an event Clara helped organize. The hall's main parking lot was cleared for the truck, with a display tent beside it to house the maps, photographs, and notebook. Volunteers hung large, high-resolution prints of the original convoy photo, along with modern shots of Sarah's restoration work. The day of the event. The air was crisp and bright. A small crowd had gathered before the truck even arrived. And when Tom's flatbed rolled in carrying Noposhornax, so's applause broke out. Sarah drove her down the ramp under her own power, the engine's low growl drawing people closer. She stood by the truck for hours, answering questions, telling the story, and watching faces change as people connected the machine in front of them to the men it had carried. Veterans lingered longest, some placing a hand on the hood in silent acknowledgement. In the tent, the notebook drew its own crowd. One elderly man pointed to a name on the roster inside and whispered to his granddaughter. That was my uncle. Another visitor, a history teacher, took photos to share with her students. Late in the afternoon, Sarah noticed a figure lingering near the edge of the crowd, a man in a dark suit, the same one she'd seen in Portsmouth. He didn't approach the truck, didn't speak, just watched. When their eyes met, he gave a single nod, not of approval, but of acceptance, and turned away. Clara joined her, following her gaze. Friend of yours? Not exactly, Sarah said, but maybe he finally understands this story's not going back in the dark. The event ended with a small ceremony. A local veterans organization presented a formal petition to the state's congressional delegation to have James McAllister's Silver Star officially recognized. Sarah stood beside the truck, the medal resting in a display case at the front. When the petition's lead signer spoke about truths carried home in steel and memory, she felt a tightness in her chest. That night, after everyone had gone, Sarah sat alone in the cab of No. 6 Hands, resting lightly on the wheel. The scent of oil and old leather filled the air. She thought of McAllister's note, the heart scratched into the dash, and the men who had depended on this truck when everything else was falling apart. She turned the key, and the engine rumbled to life. Outside, the empty parking lot echoed with the sound of voice from the past, steady and unbroken. And Sarah knew the road ahead was no longer about restoring one truck. It was about giving the past a way to keep moving forward. The weeks after the Veterans Hall event passed in a blur for Sarah Whitmore. She was still repairing fishing boat engines and tuning lawn tractors for her regular customers, but it was the truck No. 6 that pulled people into her orbit. Veterans, historians, teachers, even curious travelers found their way to her shop, often unannounced, always carrying stories. It started small. A retired army mechanic brought in a dented steel helmet from his grandfather's attic, saying, "Figured you'd know how to take care of it." A woman in her 70s arrived with a box of sepia-toned photographs, explaining that her father had driven supply trucks in France during the war. Some people brought nothing but their voices, sitting at Sarah's workbench to talk about uncles who never came home, or family letters that had stopped without explanation. At first, Sarah listened quietly, jotting notes in a spiral-bound pad, unsure how to respond to the weight of such memories. But over time, she learned to ask questions that drew out details: a road name, a unit insignia, the color of the mud in Flanders. She began filing these fragments alongside the truck's history, building a tapestry of personal accounts that might otherwise fade. Her workshop changed with her. The corner that once held dusty spare parts was now lined with shelves of labeled archival boxes. A sturdy metal cabinet gifted by a grateful veteran locked away fragile items like medals and letters. Clara jokingly called it the vault, but Sarah treated it like sacred ground. One evening, while she was oiling the truck's door hinges, Clara dropped by with a printout in hand. "Look at this," she said. "The petition for James McAllister's Silver Star has made it through the state level. Next step's the Department of Defense." Sarah read the update twice, a slow smile spreading. "We're actually doing it," she murmured. Clara grinned. "You are doing it. I'm just writing about it." But Sarah didn't feel like it was hers alone anymore. She thought of Tom hauling the truck from Portsmouth, the volunteers who'd spent Saturdays scraping rust, the strangers who'd shared family heirlooms without hesitation. The truth about No. 6 was no longer hers to guard it, belonged to everyone who cared enough to keep it alive. Then came the night she decided to open the doors wider. She called it a memory night, a casual invitation for anyone with a story or artifact to come to the shop. She set out folding chairs, brewed a big urn of coffee, and baked a batch of oatmeal cookies like her grandmother used to make. Clara brought a projector so they could show scanned photos on the back wall. She expected maybe a dozen people. Nearly 50 showed up. The air was warm with conversation, the kind that rolls over itself like waves. Some people stood to share their stories, an old Navy man recounting a mechanical failure off the coast of France, a woman describing the telegram her grandmother received in 1918. Others just listened, their eyes on the images glowing against the wall. When it was Sarah's turn, she didn't speak about the theft, the threats, or even the day she found the hidden compartment. She talked instead about her grandfather teaching her how to listen to an engine, not just for the noises it made, but for what those noises meant. "This truck," she said, resting a hand on No. 6's fender, "doesn't just run on fuel. She runs on the memories of the men who drove her, the hands that repaired her, the lives she carried. And the more we remember, the stronger she runs." The applause was quiet but steady, the kind that lingers. After everyone left, Sarah locked the shop and stood for a long moment beside the truck. She realized that somewhere along the line, she had stopped thinking of herself as just a mechanic. She was a caretaker, a witness, a bridge between the hands that built No. 6 and the eyes that would see her 100 years later. And it struck her that the fight to save one truck's story had changed her in ways no restoration manual could teach. She'd learned that history isn't kept alive in museums alone. It breathes in garages, in kitchen table conversations, in the stubborn refusal to forget. When she finally turned off the lights, the truck's silhouette loomed in the moonlit workshop, a constant reminder that the past doesn't fade. It waits for someone to carry it forward. Spring crept slowly into New England, melting the last dirty snow from the roadside ditches and filling the air with the smell of thawed earth. In Sarah Whitmore's workshop, the season felt like a second wind. No. 6 gleamed in the center bay, the sunlight from the open doors sliding across her steel frame like a spotlight. By now, the truck's story had traveled far beyond the small town. Clara's articles had been picked up by veteran organizations, historical journals, and even a regional news station. Letters poured in, some typed, some handwritten, from families who believed their relatives might have been connected to the truck's last mission. One envelope came with an official seal, the Department of Defense. Sarah opened it with hands she tried to keep steady. Inside was the news they'd been working toward for months. James McAllister's Silver Star was being formally recognized, his record updated to reflect the events of October 1917. A separate certificate, enclosed in its own protective sleeve, confirmed that No. 6's role in the rescue was being documented in the National Military Archives. Sarah read it twice, then 3 times, before calling Clara. "We did it," she said simply. "No," Clara corrected with a grin in her voice. "You did it." The recognition came with an invitation to bring No. 6 to Washington and Sansa for a special exhibit on vehicles that carried history. It would mean trailering the truck hundreds of miles. But Sarah didn't hesitate. This was her chance to let the world hear No. 6's voice. The trip itself became an event. As Tom Bennett's flatbed rolled down the interstate with No. 6 strapped securely to its deck, people honked, waved, and snapped photos. At rest stops, veterans in ball caps came up to ask about her, some sharing quick stories before Sarah climbed back into the cab of the chase vehicle. When they reached the Capitol, the Smithsonian staff greeted them like old friends. They had reserved a prominent spot in the gallery, with No. 6 positioned under soft museum lighting. The heart-shaped engraving on the dash was highlighted in the display notes, alongside high-resolution scans of McAllister's notebook and the original maps. The opening day drew a crowd that surprised even the museum staff, families with children, elderly veterans in wheelchairs, young history buffs in baseball caps. They all clustered around the truck. Sarah stood nearby, answering questions, her voice steady but warm. She told them about finding the hidden compartment, about the night the box was stolen and recovered, about the way the community had rallied to restore the truck to running condition. Some visitors touched the fender lightly, as if greeting an old friend. Others lingered over the photographs, tracing the faces of men who'd been little more than names in an archive until now. At one point, a young boy tugged his father's sleeve and pointed at the display case holding the silver star. "Why didn't he get it back then?" the boy asked. His father hesitated, then glanced at Sarah. "Because sometimes," Sarah said gently, crouching to the boy's height, "people in charge make mistakes. And it takes a long time and a lot of people to set them right." The boy nodded thoughtfully, then looked back at the truck. "I'm glad you fixed her." That night, after the crowds had gone and the gallery was quiet, Sarah stood alone with No. 6. The truck seemed different here, not just a restored vehicle, but a bridge between centuries, carrying its story to people who'd never even heard of Passchendaele before. She rested her palm on the fender. "We made it," she whispered. In that moment, she realized something important. Her work wasn't done. No. 6 had taught her that history wasn't just about preserving the past. It was about carrying it forward so it could keep teaching, keep inspiring. When she returned home to New England, she kept the shop's big bay doors open every day the weather allowed. People still came, bringing broken engines and broken stories. The truck's bay now held a different project, a 1930s fire engine in desperate need of attention, but on the far wall hung a large photograph of No. 6 in the Smithsonian, surrounded by visitors. Above her workbench, she added a new sign: Dalton Restorations, where machines remember. And underneath, in smaller hand-painted letters, because the truth doesn't die, it just waits for someone to hear it. Anyone can keep history alive if they're willing to dig deep enough and care fiercely enough. As the late afternoon light spilled through the open doors of her New England workshop, Sarah Whitmore set aside her wrench and opened a fresh notebook, not to jot down the next repair, but to draft plans for a memory night series in towns far beyond her own. This time, no one's story would be lost to dust or locked away in the dark. She understood now the truth she fought to uncover about No. 6 didn't just belong to her. It belonged to every veteran whose service had been forgotten, every family still searching for answers, and every ordinary person with the courage to protect what matters. The mechanic who once worked alone on quiet machines had become the caretaker of voices from the past, and the guide for others to do the same. Because for Sarah and for those who follow the past was never gone. It was simply waiting to be heard. The end. Up next, 2 more unforgettable journeys through history are waiting for you. Click to keep uncovering the truth, and don't forget to hit subscribe if you believe some stories are worth fighting for.